So, time to continue with our auth form here. There are a couple of places where you could start. I'll start with the validation and with collecting all the user inputs. And for that, let's start with the very first text form field here for the email address. There, I will add the validator argument, which is a function that validates the user input when prompted to. So we get the value here, which is the value entered by the user, and we can return a string, which will then be shown as an error message if we detect an error, or return null if we have no error. So the validation logic I want to apply here is very simple. I'll check if value is empty. And a very naive email address validation, I'll check if the value does not contain, hence the exclamation mark at the beginning, does not contain a @ symbol. If either of the two is true, so if it is empty or if we don't have a @ in the value, then I'll return an error text where I say, please enter a valid email address, like this. Else, if we make it past this if statement here, I will return null because then everything is all right. Now for the password. There, of course, on the password, we also should add some validation. So let's add this validator function here. And here I'll check if the value is empty, same check as before, and I'll also check the length. If the length of the password is, let's say, smaller than 6 or smaller than 7, that, by the way, is also the minimum length Firebase wants. So if it's smaller, if it's shorter than 7, then I'll return, and sorry, that's the username. I want to check this on the password, so I'll cut it and add it on the password. So here, if we're shorter than 7, I'll say password must be at least 7 characters long, and only otherwise I'll return null here. And here we need a semicolon. So now with that, back to the username field. Here we have a validator where we also get the value, and it's up to you which validation logic you want. I'll check for emptiness, or also if the value length is, let's say, shorter than 4, so if we have a very short username, then I will say, please enter at least 4 characters, and otherwise, just as in the other validators, will return null. So we got these validators, but right now they're never going to get triggered. Now, they should be triggered when the user presses this submit button here, this raised button. And we can trigger them all simultaneously through that form. That's what you also learned earlier in the course. For that, we need such a global key. You might remember this from the forms module. We create a form key for that by instantiating a global key, which will contain some form state in the end. And with this generic type, we can signal to Dart that eventually some form state will be managed with this key. And we need to connect this key to the form. So for that, we go to the form widget and set the key argument of the form to our form key. And with that form key added, we can also add a submit function. I'll name it try_submit underscore try_submit to mark that it's private and should only be called from inside this class. And in try_submit, we'll use that form key to validate the form. We get access to the form through the current state property, and then we can call validate. And this will trigger all the validators of all the text form fields in the form. This will return a result. It will tell us whether the form is valid or not. So I'll store this in a final variable or constant, therefore. And we can then check if the form is valid, and only if it is valid. So if all validators returned null, we'll continue and actually get the values and submit the form. Now, to get the values, we can again use the form key, current state, and call save. And what this will do is it will go to all the text form fields, and on every text form field, it will trigger the onSaved function here. So we need to add this to every text form field to set up the logic that should run when the entire form is being saved. The function that is triggered gets a value, which is the value the user entered, and then in there we need to do something with that value. And that something I will do is I will store the entered value in a global or a class-wide property. So for that, besides the final form key, I will add a string here, which is a true variable, so which is not constant but variable, user email, which initially is an empty string, let's say. And I also get my user name here and also the user password. So we got these three properties defined here, and these are the properties we'll now update in the onSaved methods. So for example, I'll set user email to value here. We know it's valid, otherwise this wouldn't have executed, because we only save the form if we do have valid inputs, and therefore we can save the entered value. We don't need set state here, because set state would only make one important difference. It would re-evaluate the widget and possibly re-render the UI. But this is just some behind-the-scenes data, which we need internally, and changing that data has no impact on the UI. So there is no need to re-evaluate and re-render the UI. Hence, I'll just save it like this. Now, that's the logic we also need on all the other text form fields. Here for the username, I'll set username equal to the entered value. And here on the password, unsurprisingly, we set user password equal to the entered value. So all these properties are updated when save is being called here. And therefore, after save was called, we can use those values to send our auth request to Firebase or anything like that. We'll take care about this in a next step. Now, one other thing I want to do after validating, before we actually save everything, I will use focus scope, the focus scope class provided by Flutter, which needs a context, which we have available here in the state class, to call unfocus. This will essentially just close the soft keyboard, which might still be open, as soon as we submit the form, so that the keyboard always closes, because this will move the focus away from any input field to nothing, basically. And with all of that, for the moment, I'll just print user email here, and also repeat this for user name and here for user password, so that we at least see the values. And try submit is now the method that should be connected to this raised button here. So on pressed will now point at try submit, and we add it like this without parentheses because we just want to point at it so that it's executed on our behalf when the button is pressed by the user. If we save that and we go back and I enter some email address here, and I leave out the username, but I do enter a password which is too short, and I click login, you see these error messages, so that works. And if I then fix all these errors here, and I click login, this looks better, and I clicked it twice, which is I see the outputs twice, so submitting and getting these inputs works, and that's great. Now, of course, we don't just want to get and validate all these inputs, we also want to switch between login and sign-up mode. The mode we're in will change the labels on the buttons, but it will also change the text form fields. We only want to fetch the username if we are signing up, not if we're logging in. So therefore, in the auth form, we should also manage some state. Hence, I'll add a new variable here, a bool, or actually a var here, because we can infer the type, as we can down there, since I set an initial type. So a var, which I'll name is login, which initially, let's say, is true. And this controls whether we currently are in login mode or in sign-up mode. And this should be changed whenever this flat button at the bottom is pressed. So whenever this flat button here is pressed, I want to switch. So here in this anonymous function here, we can set is login equal to what it's currently not to reverse it. But that should now be wrapped in a set state call so that the UI is also updated. Because when we change the is login mode, this does affect the UI. So this needs to go into a set state call. Now, login, for example, has an impact on this text here. There, we can check if isLogin is true, and with a ternary expression, we can return a different value for when it's true than for when it's not true. Because when it's true, we can switch to the sign up mode. So then we want to show create new account, because that's the alternative to logging in. Otherwise, if it's false, we are in sign up mode, and we want to allow the user to switch to login mode. So maybe a text like, I already have an account, is appropriate then. And also here for the raised button. If we are in login mode, I want to show the login text. But otherwise, if we are in sign up mode, I want to show sign up or sign up like this. And if we now save this, we can click this button and these labels update. Now the username field, as I mentioned, is also only required if we are signing up. So this entire text form field here should only be added conditionally. And we can do this with this pretty nice Dart syntax where we add an if statement in this array, in this widget array for the column. And this item is then added and removed dynamically to and from the list based on the condition in our if statement. So here I can check if we're not in login mode. Oops, log in. And only if we are not, the field thereafter will be added to the array. So the value thereafter will be added to the array. So only if this is not true, this text form field will be part of the columns array. If this is true, so if isLogin is true and therefore this is false, this will not be added. Now you see some blue squiggly lines here because this is a Dart feature which is only available since version 2.3. You might not have those lines. If you do have them, you can go to pubspec.yaml and simply increase that minimum SDK version you want here to 2.3. And with that, this goes away, it rebuilds, and now you will see that if I click here, you see also that this input here appears and disappears. So that's pretty nice. But you will also notice a bug. You see, if I'm in login mode, we got a password entered, but if I click on create new account, that moves to username. So actually the value in username now switches between the username field and the password field. And that happens because we dynamically add and remove a text form field, and inside of this array, Flutter is not able to efficiently differentiate between these fields, which are always the same widget. I also covered this earlier in the course, and you might remember that keys are a solution here. Keys allow Flutter to uniquely identify an element if you have similar elements next to each other. So we can add a key here to all these text form fields, and we can create a value key, which basically allows us to hard code our own identifier. And here we could add email on the email text form field, and on the username text form field, we add a username value key, and on the password field, we add a password key. And with that, you'll see that this bug is no longer there. If I now add Maximilian here in the username, if I now switch, you see it's gone in login mode, and it's also gone here because we removed the widget in the meantime, but it doesn't jump between password and username. So this bug is fixed. And with that fixed, side note, you will also see that, for example, the password and so on persists. So if I enter this, you will see I can switch and we keep it. So with that fixed, we now can work on really submitting that data and creating an actual user with Firebase.